Welcome to the Less Doing podcast, where you will learn how to start living more by doing less.
Let me help you optimize, automate, and outsource your entire life so you can focus on doing the things you love.
Now here's your host, Ari Mizell.
So we have Chris Bailey back on the podcast. Chris Bailey of A Year of Productivity. Hell, welcome back, Chris.
Hey man, how are you? How have you been? It's been a long time.
It has been a long time. And I feel like for you with the productivity project you did, where you had that period where you weren't interacting with anybody for like 2 weeks, you could just claim that you're doing that forever.
That's what I've become a monk. I don't talk to anybody. And that's my life. I'm just largely antisocial.
Yeah, and that's how you become as productive as possible, right?
Well, yeah. In a way, like that was kind of the one of the experiments that I did, like living in total isolation for 10 days. A long while back at this point, but that was one of the ones that really changed the way I thought about productivity. Because like you can be ultra productive when you're not surrounded by any people. You can focus so deeply, you can get a lot of stuff done, but then you have nobody to share the fruits of that productivity with. And so like, what the hell is the point of becoming more productive if you don't have a family surrounding you that you can share that with? We were just chatting before we hit the record button here. This is why we should become more productive, for the people in our lives, not to chase money or profit or whatever it might be. It's for that broader network that I think this stuff is worth investing in.
Well, and that brings up an interesting point for me too, because one of the things that we've had a big focus on at our company lately is on accountability. So how do you, that plays into that very well. And one of the things that comes up with accountability with entrepreneurs is whether you're isolated or not, a lot of times there's really nobody other than you that knows if you had an amazing day or not, right? Because it's like kind of siloed. Like even me, my wife doesn't know any of the things that I do in work. We don't talk about work. It's just, we don't. So how do you see accountability affecting productivity in general?
Yeah, but my fiance and I, we have a weird thing that we do. So whenever, she's studying for a PhD in economics, she's significantly smarter than I am in a lot of different ways, but that way is one of them. And so that academia is so unstructured. And so you have these people like, a thesis is about the length of a good book. Maybe it's a bit shorter, but it takes a bit more work and a bit more research. And it takes, about a year to write a book, a good book, and to conduct the research, and maybe a bit more than that. But you have a lot of folks in academia take way long, because when there's so little structure, you procrastinate on stuff. When things are ambiguous, they're unstructured, they're sometimes boring and frustrating. These all have been shown to be triggers of procrastination. And so every morning she sends me, we have a WhatsApp account specifically for this. She sends me her 3 daily intentions. So the things that she wants to be held accountable for that day. And so at the end of the day, I ask her, okay, did you get the 3 things done? And if there's not a good reason, then, I don't like hold her accountable, but there is that sort of pressure that you have somebody that you share the things you want to accomplish with. For me, I like to hold myself accountable at the end of the day. And so, I set 3 intentions at the start of each day, because it's a nice ritual. It allows me to filter out what's important from what isn't. And at the end of the day, I look back and I think, okay, how many of these things did I accomplish? And over time, I see this. And sometimes if I need some accountability, I'll ask Arden, hey, would you mind, holding me accountable this week? I'm going through a period of low motivation, or there's not enough structure in my work. And so, having somebody that you can do this with, even though I'm a big nerd about productivity, you are too, we haven't figured this all out. We need somebody to keep ourselves accountable. So I find those are a couple strategies that really helps, especially with the days that are more ambiguous. If there's a kind of a structure of work kind of set out for me. I don't need the accountability. I'll get the work done, but it's on the days when there's less to do, and you know, I tend to procrastinate because that work is ambiguous and unstructured. That's when adding that structure in the form of accountability is really helpful.
So what are you being productive at in general, right? Because again, you know, we've had you on the podcast. Productivity Project was a whole bunch of different things that you were testing out. Now with this book, Hyperfocus, which is how to be more productive in a world of distraction. Like, you know, what are you getting, like, other than writing, right? What are you doing with that time that you're trying to be productive?
Well, these are very much research projects. And so, you know, it's reading research articles. It's talking to academics and, you know, trying to make their work accessible to a broader general audience, because, you know, there's a lot of nomenclature and things like that in these papers in academia. And it's frankly just kind of, you know, I like to see myself as kind of that bridge between the academic side, the scientific side of productivity, and the general side of productivity. It's kind of an odd circular thing in a way, you know, being productive writing about productivity. You know, it would be easier if my topic were, you know, history or something where I'm writing presidential biographies, and so I could measure, you know, it's not as circular, but it's just kind of a byproduct of the topic.
So what is some of the most surprising things that you've learned from this last experiment and this research with Hyperfocus?
It's that there's so many things that surprised me. I think the big thing that we sort of know on some level that we don't necessarily connect with, though, is how little control we have over our attention. And I think we kind of, you know, people might nod their head and say, of course, but we don't realize the level to which this is the case. You know, the environments that we surround ourselves with, that we kind of enter into out of habit, especially the digital environments that we're in, they kind of guide our attention themselves, and so we kind of lose control over our attention. So we're working on our computer and we get an email notification, and then we focus on that, and then we respond to that, and then we close that window, then we get back to what we were doing until the next email notification comes in. We're having a conversation with a meaningful conversation such as this one, and maybe our phone is nearby and we got a text message, and so we pay attention to that, and this happens very, very frequently throughout the day. And, you know, if you divide up the moments of the day when you have control over your attention versus when you do not. So when the world has control over your attention versus when you do, I think most people would be surprised just the extent to which their technological environments have control over their attention. And you know, it's not our fault, frankly, because the fascinating thing about our attention is it naturally gravitates, our focus naturally gravitates to anything that's one of three things. So we naturally focus on anything that is pleasurable. We naturally focus on anything that we find threatening in the moment. And we naturally focus on anything that is new and novel. And there's even this novelty bias embedded within our mind's prefrontal cortex, where each time we focus on something new and novel, it rewards us with a hit of dopamine, the pleasure chemical, for doing that. And so we find ourselves in these loops of paying attention to pleasurable, threatening, and novel things, you know, laying down in bed, bouncing around between a loop of 5 or 6 apps on our phone before we get out of bed for 20 or 30 minutes. And this manifests itself in some fascinating ways. You know, one of the most alarming statistics I encountered when I was writing this book is that on average, when we're working in front of a computer, we only focus on one thing for 40 seconds before we switch to doing something else. And if we have apps like iMessage and Slack and you know, whatever else, I am open in the background, this lowers down to 35 seconds, and this is measured in real world environments on actual people, not like mice in a maze or something like that. And so I think this is probably the most shocking thing that I encountered. You know, I think a lot of us know that we're distracted a lot. A lot of us know that we should tame distractions and stuff like that. That's obvious. But I think the reason why we're distracted. Just the fact that it's not our fault, that our mind is wired by our evolution to pay attention to anything that's pleasurable, threatening, or novel. And that this leads us to be switching between things every 35 to 40 seconds, and that the world has control of our attention. I think when you take these ideas together as one, you really begin to arrive at the conclusion that our attention is worth reclaiming from the world around us.
So what in general, like for you, I know, and I mean, I'm sure the list could be many, but what are some of the top three things that distract you the most? Because I know what they are for me. And I'm curious for you.
Yeah. Oh man, there's so much. My phone is a constant distractor, so I always get it out of the room when I have something important to do. Right now, it's lying down in the other room while I'm in my office. It's constant. It never makes a sound, but there's always these notifications coming in. I have all the vibrations and the sounds turned off, but it's still, it's still probably the most pleasurable, threatening, and novel thing in my environment. Email is another great example of something that is a big distraction for me, because with the kind of work that I do, that you do, there's a lot of validation that comes in from readers and listeners in email. So email's another, and from publishers and different media stuff. So email is another good example of one. And I think there's so many, like websites that. I purposefully don't visit any news websites. I subscribe to a physical paper, so I get my news in that form, because it's more, it's more thoughtful. You read beyond the front page headlines to dig deep into the actual important news, as opposed to just the news of the moment. But so news websites aren't necessarily a big chat, but Reddit is a big chat, especially I'm big into knitting and mechanical keyboards. And so those subreddits, those take up a lot of time and attention.
Hold on, Chris. Knitting and mechanical keyboards?
Yeah, like not together, but like, I love these are two of my favorite. Let me tell you, do you have a mechanical keyboard, Ari?
I do not.
Oh, let me tell you. So you do a lot of writing, and it's kind of like, do you play the piano, or have you played a piano?
I have.
So you have like the keyboard pianos where like you tap down on a switch and like you don't feel anything. And then you have a grand piano where you're playing the piano and you feel each key. And in each key you know that it's hitting a string, because the piano is a string instrument. It's hitting a string in the back of the piano, and that's reverberating around the room, and that's creating the beautiful, luxurious sound that you hear. And then you have on the other side the like shitty like electronic keyboards where it's like digital, and you're flipping a bit somewhere in the software, and that's telling the other software to play a sound over those crappy speakers on the piano. The difference between like the default keyboard on your computer, whatever one comes with, and a mechanical keyboard is like going from the crappy electronic keyboard to a grand piano. This is, maybe I'm selling it a bit much, but like this is what my keyboard says. It's like chocolatey. It's very rich, and like each key actuation, because there's an actuation force that I could nerd out about this. You could probably tell.
Forget nerd out. This is you're like arousing me.
This is, it's like keyboard porn. Like, this is why I love, like, if you go to the mechanical keyboard subreddit, man, it's like people posting pictures of their keyboards. But here's the tip that I would offer people. The big two key switches in mechanical keyboards, there are the blues and the browns. The blues are very clacky. The browns, think brown like chocolate. They're very smooth. They feel very luxurious to type on. Highly recommended. Sales are going to go through the roof of cherry brown mechanical keyboards.
I mean,
and knitting, man. Knitting. Have you knit?
I have never knit. Tell me about knitting.
Knitting is one of my favorite hobbies. Like I've wanted to learn for years. I signed up on a total whim here in like the small town Canada city that I live in, Kingston. And so, there's a knitting store downtown. I thought, well, why the hell not? Like it seems like a fun thing to try. Signed up, and it's one of my favorite things to do now. I knit on planes. I knit on if you see a younger looking guy knitting on a plane, chances are like it's not a big demographic of people. Chances are that's me. So come and say hi. It's like, and it's a beautiful way. I'm big into attention, of course, and the research around that topic. And it's a beautiful way to let our attention rest and wander. This is one of the most underrated modes of our mind. If you think back to when your best, most creative insights strike you, the ones that aren't kind of a logical sequence of decisions, but ones that are kind of a logical leap, chances are your mind is wandering when that hits you. You might be taking a shower, you might be swimming laps, you might be having your morning coffee, and suddenly, like, boom, an idea hits you from out of the blue. And it's because our mind wanders to some fascinating places. When our mind is wandering, especially when we're doing something habitual, not only do these ideas come to us, but we also plan for the future. Our mind wanders to the future about 50% of the time when our attention is at rest. And so this is the way I get that. It's habitual. So, you kind of start, you cast off a row, and then you follow through the rest of the row largely on habit, and your mind wanders to the future. Your mind wanders to ideas. You're able to connect to the past, to the present, to the future, all three mental destinations to come up with ideas and connect dots in that way. So it's one of my favorite hobbies to do that.
So what does a sort of typical day look like for you? And everyone has a different opinion about morning routines and stuff. I don't have one. So
yeah.
How do you get going in the day?
I used to have a morning routine too. I don't have one. I think my opinions on routines have changed quite a bit. I used to really be into them, but now I'm not really. I think routines are overrated because I think we should structure the day, our days, around what we want to accomplish rather than what we have done in the past. And so, every morning's different. So I don't have a coffee every morning because sometimes I'm doing a caffeine reset, like right now. So I'm just drinking herbal tea. Usually I start the day off. I read the newspaper. I'm disconnected until 8 a.m. because I disconnect from the internet between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. because it's kind of like a nice way to wind down after the day and wind up at the beginning of the day. I don't really have one. I drink some tea. I spend some time with my fiance. We talk a little bit about, the stories that are in the papers. And when 8 a.m. rolls around, sometimes I'll do some writing because I find that that's my best time to write. And I usually don't eat in the morning because I think eating in the morning is a waste of time.
Oh, I like that. Okay. So have you found how diet affects your productivity in general?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of intermittent fasting, and it's something that I thought was total bullshit that I've really come around on. Really limiting my meals to two good meals a day. Having a large lunch, a small dinner, often no breakfast, unless I'm really hungry in the morning. Then I'll eat. If you're hungry, then you should eat. But I find that I'm usually not hungry in the morning. That just having some tea is all I need. But I think that, the biggest change that I've made is shrinking the quantity of food. There's kind of the quality of food that we tend to focus on, but the portions that we eat are insane. If you look at the McDonald's meals, the fries, I've started to see the large fry over time as like a way of that's like the standard size. But if you look through history, it used to be like a third of that size, and people were just fine. They were just as full after that meal. And so I think we kind of supersize all of our meals, but unintentionally. And I think we eat more than we think we need to. And so kind of noticing how much food your body asks for is something that people don't really do, because eating is something that we so often do out of habits. We just kind of like, all right, it's 7 a.m. So I guess I eat every day at 7 a.m. So I'm going to eat. But is your body asking for food? Are you like actually hungry, or is your mind just hungry for food? So I think making that distinction and noticing the quantity of food, I focus mostly on eating a paleo diet. I'm trying to cut meet out where I can over time. But yeah, I think the quantity matters sometimes more than the quality.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. And I agree. So when one of the things that you get from your book is this idea of using laziness to your advantage, right? So tell us about that.
Ah, yes. Yeah. Are you would you consider yourself a lazy person?
I don't think so, but I probably, if I'm looking from the outside, I think it would appear lazy in a lot of ways. Yes. I definitely look for shortcuts, and I like good enough is good enough for me a lot of times.
Yeah, like I think laziness is one of the most underrated things that can make us more productive. And by the way, I don't mean laziness in the sense of like, okay, I don't want to do anything. I'm just gonna like veg out in front of Netflix with like a bucket of popcorn chicken or whatever. I mean like.
I think that's considered depression.
Yeah, that's like something else. And that something else is amazing. No, I'm just like, productivity is great and all, but sometimes Netflix binges are great too. So it's all about like that that balance. But I don't mean laziness in the sense of that. Like giving up on your life. I mean laziness in the sense of deliberately disconnecting and practicing idleness. Idleness is not laziness. It's a lost art. I would argue. Idleness in the sense of reading the paper and getting bored every once in a while, drinking your morning coffee just to enjoy the morning coffee. Doing less. And I think it's really a lost art because of the same reasons that knitting is such a wonderful idea for our productivity. One of the experiments I conducted in writing this book was making myself purposely bored for an hour a day for a month. And so, one day I read the iTunes terms and conditions for an hour. It's actually shorter than you might think and more readable than you might think. You'd be surprised, man. Like I had time to read it 3 times that day. If you have any questions about it, let me know. I waited on hold with Air Canada's baggage claims department for another hour. Another hour, I peeled exactly 5 potatoes. Another hour, I watched one cloud in the sky. Like doing these things to purposefully make my mind bored. And what I found was that when our mind is at rest and when it's, boredom's not an attractive emotion or feeling, because it's kind of this restlessness that we experience as we adjust from a high level of stimulation down into a lower level of stimulation. But what is worth experiencing is the benefits of letting our mind purposefully wander. When we swim laps at the pool, when we have our morning coffee, just sipping on the coffee, it's such a beautiful experience. Maybe if our notepad is nearby, we might do some journaling, we might capture some ideas. And it's because of, that future planning that I was talking about. When our mind is this is the most fascinating thing about this deliberate mind wandering. I call it scatter focus because we kind of scatter our attention. When our mind is wandering in scatter focus, we think about the future. We've been shown to think about the future 48% of the time. So there's this prospective bias. You notice your mind planning when you're, say, walking down the office corridor to go to go to a meeting and you don't have your phone with you. Your mind begins to think about the meeting. You begin to think about what you want to say. You begin to think about the people there. Our minds are wired not to think about the past, but to think about the future. We think about the present 28% of the time when our mind is wandering, and the past just 12% of the time. The rest of the time we're thinking about ideas or having thoughts that aren't weighted by a particular time. And so when we connect all 3 of these mental destinations, again, this is when our ideas strike us. This is when we plan for the future. Here's one of the most amazing ideas I encountered in writing this book is that we have been shown to think about our goals 14 times as much when our mind is wandering versus when we're focused on something. Isn't that like that's amazing? And so if you find that you don't think about your goals, if you find that you don't set intentions, if you find that fewer ideas are coming to you, if you find that you have less energy, look at how often you let your mind rest. Look at how often you let your mind wander. Look at how often you practice this idleness in your day. Because chances are, all of us are getting less of it than we used to because we're surrounded by so many things that are pleasurable, threatening, and novel. These things hijack our attention, but we need to reclaim it for this reason, because of these frankly beautiful benefits.
It's actually funny because I was just talking about boredom as like a benefit over the last couple of weeks with my team, and one of the things for me is like I have 4 kids, and pushing them on the swings is like that's a boredom spot for me, because it's like all 4 of them like just sort of moving back and forth. They're not really talking about anything. It's somewhat rhythmic, and I really tend to lose myself. And I've gotten some great content ideas from those moments. It's interesting how we're like scared of being bored.
It's because it involves adjusting downward into a lower level of stimulation. That feeling of boredom, like it's when we have that sudden adjustment. We kind of, we have a busy week, then we're lying down on the couch on Sunday afternoon. It's during that sudden adjustment that we experience feelings of anxiety and boredom and restlessness, but it's worth getting to the other side of that stimulation. And like, I think boredom is really overrated. Like people kind of sexify it and make it like really attractive. And like there's like books about the power of boredom. I think boredom is a, where you do like nothing at all. That's kind of like, nobody wants to experience pure boredom. You don't want to lay down in an isolation chamber for like 2 hours, but like pushing your kids on a swing, it's a wonderful experience. It lets your mind wander. It lets you get down into that lower level of stimulate. And we all need, it sounds kind of challenging though, actually, like four, so you have 4 swings going at one time, and you like push one, then the next, then the next, then the next, then you like run back. I'm like visualizing this right now.
Well, I always think of it like the vaudeville actor do it with the spinning plates, running back and forth on the stage.
Yeah.
That's usually how I treat it. And yeah, it's very hard to sort of think about, or to think of. No, sorry, it's hard to focus on anything really meaningful at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, the habit kind of takes over, and like this is the thing. Like we only have so much attention to give to the world around us in the moment, and different things occupy a different amount of this attentional space that we have to give to the world. And so when we do something that's a habit, like pushing our kids on a swing, great example of that, sipping a coffee and just letting our mind rest a little bit. Habitual things have been shown to actually lead us to a greater number of creative insights in research compared to, doing nothing or focusing on something. And plus it makes this scatter focus fun because, we're able to rest while we scatter our attention for longer, because this habitual thing kind of weights us down into the present moment and allows us to keep going until, the kids want to get off the swing or the cup of coffee is done, or we've finished swimming our laps at the pool, or we've finished knitting a few lines of a scarf, whatever it happens to be. It's really like, it's something we don't get enough of. And I'm so happy you're chatting with your team about this, because we're so stimulated these days. We have so much going on, but we have a lot going on in the moment too, where, we're bouncing between things every 35 seconds, and there's so much dopamine coursing through our mind that we need to get to the other side of stimulation. Cause that's, if you think to when you're able to think the deepest about what you're doing, that's when that occurs.
It's also, so I'm usually pretty good about this in general, I would say, but it's funny actually. So just the other night, my wife and I were watching something on Netflix, and we finished one show, and she started to look for another show. And while she was looking for another show, I picked up my phone. And I don't usually have my phone in the bedroom, actually. Like I'll leave it downstairs on another floor. But while she was searching for the other show, I picked up my phone. I was looking at my phone, and she called me out on it. And I was like, oh yeah, right. I mean, it's like, I can wait a few seconds, while she's like finding another show. It's like a stimulation to take me from one stimulation to the next stimulation.
It's funny because We actually process our experiences with a different part of our mind when we're multitasking like that. When we're constantly like looking for. This isn't my quote, but like I forget who said this. But if the first thing you reached for in the morning was a bottle of whiskey, you'd be an alcoholic, right? So like, what does it say that the first thing we do is reach for our phone and spend 20 or 30 minutes and that gets in the way of our day? And like something I realized in writing the book, like I began to compare, there are some experiences where we multitask during them and other times we don't. Like watching a movie is a really good example of this. So if we're watching a show on Netflix, for example, and our phone is nearby, maybe our tablet's nearby, so we're multitasking and while we eat food. When we switch our attention around between all these different things, our mind processes the experience instead of through our hippocampus, which is responsible for memory. It processes it through our basal ganglia, which is responsible for rote activity and habits. And so we remember it less compared to, say, when we're in a theater and, they have that advertisement at the start of every movie, shut your damn phone off, you addict. And so everybody shuts their phone off except for the one guy in the front. And so you actually process the experience. It's more meaningful. You remember the movies you see in theater significantly more than the shows you watch on the couch when you multitask. And it's for this reason. If you find yourself, and this is, I think, I set out when I wrote Hyperfocus to write a book about productivity, but I realized like our attention is so much bigger than productivity. Productivity is a kind of side effect of managing our attention well. But the real reason to manage our attention well is like the state of our attention determines the state of our lives. If we're distracted in each moment, these moments accumulate day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, to create a life that feels distracted and overwhelming. But the same is true if we focus on something meaningful and productive in the moment, as our experiences become more meaningful and productive as a result. And part of this is doing less in the moment, so shifting our attentional spotlight less often, so we process the world differently and actually remember. We can only see meaning in what we remember in the first place.
That's profound and really beautiful, Chris. And so, I really hope that people get a chance to read the book. So before I ask you, my favorite last question of these interviews, when and where can people get the book?
It's in bookstores wherever you want. It's on Amazon. It's in bookstores everywhere. There's an audiobook. If you like the sound of my voice, I read the audiobook in the same studio that Justin Bieber recorded a few albums in. Drake recorded a few albums in this studio. Uptown Funk was recorded in this studio. So that might come off in the recording. Probably not. But the book is called Hyperfocus: How to Be More Productive in a World of Distraction. And thank you for having me, man. Oh, last question.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is it?
Yeah, the last question. So what are your top 3 pieces of advice for people to be more effective? And you've answered this before, but it was probably 3 years ago. So go for it.
Yeah, we should do this every 3 years, check in.
It's a deal.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's schedule, let's schedule 3 years from now, that thing. So, 3 things to become more effective. Notice all you can about your attention. Notice how distracted you are. Notice how long you're able to focus for in one sitting. Notice how long your mind wanders for against your will before you catch it. Notice how bored you are. Notice how much of your time you spend with intention. Maybe that'll be number 2. This is one of the best measures I think we could have for our productivity. Productivity, we're perfectly productive, in my opinion, when we accomplish what we set out to do. Those are the days, whether our intention is to like relax on a beach and put our feet up or like get a lot of work done. If we intend to do something and we follow through with that intention, I would argue that we're perfectly productive. And so I would look at what % of the day, just approximate it, you spend with intention behind what you're doing. Because the greater that percentage, you will see your productivity go up over time if you're choosing and intending to do things that are productive, that accomplish things that you care about, that are meaningful. And I think your meaning will go up alongside with that. Third piece of advice. Watch less news. Really pay attention to what you consume. We see the world and we perceive the world through the lens of the information that we've consumed in the past. One study I encountered the other day, they had participants watch 6 or more hours of news coverage about the Boston Marathon bombings. And they found that the people who watched more than 6 hours of news were more likely to develop PTSD than someone who was in the marathon and personally affected by it. The single biggest predictor of fear and anxiety in our lives is how much time we spend watching TV talk shows, of all things. If you add up the time that somebody spends watching TV over the course of their life, over the course of an average lifespan, we watch 16.9 years of television. And so if you want to live longer, your time is there. You're just not spending it on what's productive and meaningful. And so, that would be the final piece of advice. The state of our attention really does determine the state of our lives, and our moments accumulate. And so our attention matters, I think, right now more than ever.
So I actually, you sparked one more question that I got to ask now. So, so when you hear somebody say to you, Chris, this sounds great. These all sound really good, but I just don't have time. Like, how do you respond to that when someone says they don't have time?
Yeah. When somebody says they don't have time, it's the biggest bullshit excuse in the world. Because we all have time for things. It's just we spend it on other things. And so, meditation is a really good example of this. If somebody says, I don't have time for meditation, I don't have time to meditate for 20 minutes a day. I might ask them, okay, how much time every day do you spend on Instagram? Do you have time to watch an episode of Friends for 20 minutes? And sometimes I catch myself in this too. If I say, I don't have time to meditate today, I'll ask myself, okay, do I have time to watch, 20 minutes of tech videos on YouTube? And the answer is usually yes. And so I just swap the tasks out and tell myself, okay, man, come on. You have time to meditate. You just want to spend it on other things. And so I think this is a fascinating thing. It's a story we tell ourselves about our lives. If you have 4 kids, if you're working at capacity, you don't have time to grab a coffee with somebody, and one of your kids suddenly gets sick and you have to take them to the hospital, you will find the time to do that while getting other things done. The time is always there. It's just that we spend it on other things, usually, that are less important. It's not that we don't have the time for something, it's that we don't have the attention for something. Like reading is a good example of this. People say they don't have time to read, but they have time to consume social media for hours a day. It's not that we don't have the time, it's that we don't have the attention and that we don't care enough.
Yeah, I totally couldn't have said it better myself. So Chris, thank you. This was last interview with you was awesome. This one was amazing as well. So thank you for your time. I hope people can take the time to get the book and put attention to reading it. Have a great one.
Thanks so much, man. Yeah, we'll chat in another 3 years then.
Okay, I'll do that. Thanks for listening to the Less Doing podcast. At Less Doing, we help entrepreneurs who have opportunity in excess of what their infrastructure can support to set up systems and processes that empower a team to ultimately make themselves more replaceable. That way they can optimize, automate, and outsource everything in their businesses in order to be more effective. If you want to find out more about Less Doing, the podcast, the blog, the books, and all of the wonderful programs we offer to help you get from where you are to where you know you want to be, go to lessdoing.com/podcast and check out our OAO blueprint so you can get started today.